One false doctrine leads to a great many lies. Again, one false doctrine leads to a great many lies. When I wrote this down, I had thoughts. That's what I do. When I have a thought, I just write it down. I had a lot of thoughts, but now I'm sort of blank. But I decided to do this video anyway, just to plant a seed. Because maybe it'll cause those seeds to burst in you, and you can think of examples. How you've seen how one false belief can cause people to completely misunderstand every scripture, or almost every scripture they touch. I'll give you some examples. Seventh-day Adventists with their soul sleep. When they believe in this soul sleep nonsense, they just mess everything else up as far as death is concerned. Or if they believe about the Sabbath, or whatever the case may be, they just completely don't see how the church started on Sunday, how it continued on Sunday, tithes were on Sunday, the Lord rose on the Sunday. The early church wrote that the church gathered on Sunday. We're talking 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century church writings. How they will believe what the Catholics wrote in the 18th and 19th century. Over 1,000 years later, about the Sabbath was changed when the Sabbath was never changed. Jews would even laugh at that. The Sabbath was never ever changed. But see, one belief, one false doctrine leads to a whole bunch of distortion. Jehovah's Witness. You take one thing, maybe even two things, and everything else just goes down the tubes with it. Jesus was an angel. Now everything concerning Jesus' divinity, they mess up in the scriptures. Or there's no hell. Because they believe that there's no hell, it doesn't matter to them if they're right or wrong. They just think they'll just go to this paradise earth place. So even though we can demonstrate how they're distorted, everything else they touch, it doesn't matter, because they have one belief that there's no hell, so they don't fear that they're wrong. I see it everywhere. I see it everywhere. One false doctrine leads to a great many biblical errors. Post-tribulation people, for example, they have one belief, and because of that one belief, they're blinded to everything else. They don't see that Matthew 24 is a twofold question. Jesus being asked about the rapture and the second coming. Looking at Jesus' answers is evident. In one answer, he gives signs. And then he says, and then the end shall come, because the rapture is the end for all saints. But he continues to talk, but pay attention to what he's saying. He's focusing on the Jews, and only the Jews. He mentions the Jewish temple. He mentions the Jewish Sabbath. He also says, flee Judea. He's obviously focused on the Jews, because the second coming will never ever happen until Israel repents as a nation. Jesus said, you will never see my face again until you learn to say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. The second coming is not for the church. It's for the Jews. It's for Israel. But they can't see that, because one false doctrine leads to a whole bunch of biblical distortions. Peter said it. Peter even said, listen, basically you're saying stupid people mess around with what Paul wrote, as they do every other scripture they touch, to their own damnation. One false doctrine leads to a great many biblical distortions. KKK are no different. The Hebrew Israelites are no different. If they believe that Israelites were black, that one false doctrine has caused them to literally misrepresent and distort pretty much every scripture they use to try and say that Hebrews were black. I refuted them all. You've seen this in my previous videos, my first videos dealing with Hebrew Israelites. So again, just encouraging you to be careful of what you believe. Wrong foundational cores, wrong foundational beliefs, wrong New Age winds of doctrines leads to a great many false teachings.